Okay, Daniel, we're here finally after expecting to do this for a while. And my name is Jeff Falzone. I'm talking with Daniel Cowan. And this is the first video in a new YouTube channel where we're basically just going to be exploring the authorship question from the perspective mainly of Edward de Vere as the primary candidate as the writer of the Shakespeare plays. But one of the things I'm really excited about this channel is that we have 3 people that are gonna be just uploading videos when we feel so inspired. Um, and we have 3 different kinds of perspectives, styles, and attitudes towards it that we all really appreciate. So, the idea is this video is just gonna be Daniel and I talking, answering some basic questions to introduce ourselves, and then, we're gonna interview Matt. So you'll get to hear Matt. There'll be another video with Matt's introduction.
Should say Matt Hutchinson.
And yeah, yeah. And then after that, once this channel gets up and going, and we'll talk about this more later in our conversation together, it's going to be a channel where all 3 of us are just uploading our own information, questions, and interests, and occasionally having group conversations with each other.
Yeah. Yep, that sounds good.
Yeah. So, Daniel and uh, I don't remember exactly how we met, and we're gonna kind of tell our origin stories soon. But I just want to say I'm really excited to be talking with you
Yeah.
in this context because you're one of my. You've always, you and I, we both are passionate about this subject, and we have very different tendencies and
Yep.
skill sets.
I think I do remember when
Okay, go.
I think it was actually I think it's about 3 years ago because that's when the first video on this channel went up and then the channel went dormant. But you listened to that and responded to me. And then also I had written an article about the Shakespeare authorship, and I called it Hermetic Shakespeare. And I mentioned the art of memory in that, and we'll talk about it later. But you also are familiar with the art of memory and have done a lot of memorization practices. So I think it was 3 years ago, and like we've said, we've been emailing and Facebook messaging ever since. So I'm not sure that there's like hundreds of pages of back and forth on over email.
I know.
And the podcast idea, I think, is 2 years old, at least, but,
Yeah.
just never got around to it till recently.
I do wanna say, I'll never forget when I first heard your voice because I was walking or I now live in Missouri, but at the time I lived in, just north of Seattle, Washington, and I was walking around on this beautiful lake called Green Lake,
Oh,
in North Seattle, and I loved my walks. I'd always put on a podcast while I was walking, and that's when you're that I think what you're talking about,
yeah,
where you first put yourself out there in a conversation,
yeah,
and I walked for I think I did 2 laps, so it took me about 2 hours going around the lake, listening to you talk about the authorship question,
yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, yeah, um this is my companion,"
yeah,
because you're really fascinated with all the details, but you also aren't very dogmatic. You're constantly searching for more and more good
yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll use this first introductory conversation. We just wanna give people a chance to kind of know, who we are, where we are at in, our explorations of the authorship question, and what we'd like to do with this channel,
Yep.
what kind of content we'd like that you could expect from us, and what kind of things we're interested in researching, reading at the moment, that sort of thing. And then we'll hopefully have another one of these to follow up with Matt Hutchinson, and we can get his what
Yep.
he's a pretty good scholar. Surprising how much he's read and how much he knows. He kind of keeps a little bit of a low profile unless you're keeping up with the Oxfordian and the presentations that are coming out, because I think every year he has one article in the Oxfordian, and the last few Concord, because he's had a presentation as well, so.
Yeah, and I know he has a well, I've been aware of him online without knowing it was him, and I really appreciate his thoughts,
Yeah,
and I look forward to getting to know him more through our channel.
yeah,
Um, And yeah, you came up with 4 really good just opening questions that I think will be great to go through
Yeah.
as we introduce ourselves to each other and to the channel.
Did you wanna start with the first one? Like, maybe talk about your history with like, I was kind of interested in not necessarily, I mean, you could talk about when you got into authorship question, but sometimes I like to hear when people got into Shakespeare at all, and at what point the authorship question came into it. So if you
Yes.
start with that one, that'd be interested to just
No,
hear
that's that's actually I like that you bring it back even before we heard about the question, what was Shakespeare to us, right?
yeah,
Like, so for me, I think I fall into a very stereotypical North American, United States, um, story
mhm,
in that you always hear about Shakespeare. And then I think when you get to 7th or 8th grade here, you start formally reading some Shakespeare passages and,
yeah,
learning to, yeah, analyze it. I I was not impressed. I found it boring. I couldn't understand it, and it was just as annoying as any other, um, like, it was like a foreign language to
yeah,
me, and the fact that we were supposed to, like, find it amazing and it was daunting. I didn't like it.
mm,
Um, I did like reading, so it wasn't like I was against the notion of, like, interpreting texts,
yeah,
but Shakespeare just felt too foreign to me.
yeah,
Um and that was probably I mean, as I got older, I got more sophisticated, so I could at least say, "Oh, yeah, Shakespeare is an impressive person," but I never really sunk into Shakespeare
yeah.
until when I moved back to Ashland, Oregon, which has the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, in 2005. Uh, um, that's when I started splitting my time between being a psychotherapist
Yeah,
and working at the festival.
yeah.
So, suddenly half of my life is at this incredible festival that does, on average, 4 to 5 Shakespeare plays a year and 7 or 8 contemporary or historical plays. So,
Are those all at
Shakespeare
the
was
same
always
time, or is that like a summer festival?
No, that's
Yeah,
great that you asked that because
yeah.
yeah, anybody watching right now from the Shakespeare Festival, you'll be very proud of me because one of the things that people don't know is that the Shakespeare Festival runs from basically March to October, end of
Oh, okay.
October. It's a it's almost a whole year,
Yeah,
and it's not just Shakespeare. It's like Shakespeare, like I said, it's maybe 4 or 5 plays out of 11 or so.
yeah.
So, um, when I started working there, you get free tickets, you start going to these plays in these outdoor Elizabethan theater that's under the stars in Ashland, Oregon, and they have a tiny theater of about 200 people, and they have, about an 800 seated theater. So, that's when Shakespeare started, like, sinking in. It started becoming a different experience for me.
Yeah.
Um, and there's just conversations. You just can't avoid Shakespeare, and it's not so much like a classroom, it's much more like a dialogue. People talking about like, the actors talking about what it means to them. The plays are fascinating, and so for me, it was around 2009 that I would have said I was starting to become very interested in what Shakespeare is doing with his plays and poems.
Mhm.
Um, and, I'll segue from there into our question, like what got me interested in the authorship question,
Mm.
because I think it was around 2010, and the Shakespeare Festival is doing this amazing production of Hamlet, which you can actually download. You can get on audible.com. That entire production is has been recorded and it's on Audible.
Mm.
Um, that's when I started falling in love with Shakespeare and thinking about realizing that it wasn't just the language, it was the thinking, it was the social context. There was just so much going on that fascinated me. And I remember at some point that year, somebody mentioned the authorship question. And I was like, what? What's that? And I'm sure what I heard back was something like, oh, there's a bunch of people that think that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. And I probably rolled my eyes and said, "I have no interest in that." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's it just felt like cliche.
Well, actually knowing you,
Um,
you I just know you're you have, like, an impulse to be like, "How did you come to that? Why do you like, why would you think that? Why would you" so I could imagine the first time hearing it, how you would, of how that would first hit you.
Thank you for saying that because you're right. I'm sure I have an idea. I don't think
Yeah,
it was this person, but I have an idea of who first said it to me. I
yeah,
won't say their name in public, but I have a feeling. And you're right. I probably spent the next hour
yeah,
saying, "Why do you think that?"
yeah, yeah,
And we had a very, I hope, friendly conversation
yeah,
where I was very skeptical.
yeah.
Um, and then after that, that was the first time I learned, oh, some people think that the guy from Stratford did not write the plays, even though his name was Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Um, then somebody told me, "Hey, Jeff, the second in command here at the festival, his name is Paul Nicholson. Amazing guy, wonderful guy. Hi, Paul, if you're watching, thank you, because somebody told me that Paul, uh, believes that Edward de Vere wrote all the plays." And I said, "Seriously?" Because I knew Paul a little bit,
Yeah,
and I was like, "Really? He thinks that somebody else wrote the plays?" And then one day he came into the, box office area, and I approached him, and I said, "Paul, I heard that you don't think Shakespeare wrote the plays." And he was very generous, and he laughed, and he said, "I don't." And I said, "Really? What why?" And we had this conversation where he told me a few things, and I said and then he looked at me and he said, I'll just bring you some books." And he brought me 3 books, and one of them was the Diana Price book,
oh yeah,
um, Shakespeare's Unorthodox Biography.
yeah,
Yeah. And I will say that's if somebody had to if I had to name when I started thinking, it's not stupid or crazy or conspiratorial to think there's at least a question here, it was reading her book when she broke down the 16 categories
yeah,
of what would be evidence of a literary writer,
yeah,
and then she found, I think, over 20 different writers from that time
yeah,
and started compiling it. That when I read that and I saw that the guy from Stratford, Shakespeare. I just call him Shakespeare instead of Shakespeare, Shakespeare.
yeah,
Um, when I saw that there was nothing filling the boxes, I got interested. So that was like when I really realized I find this interesting, really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess my turn. I think it was funny listening to you talk because mine was like similar, but in some ways like very different. So, like the same as you know, you start. I'd never read any Shakespeare before school, obviously, and really no classical literature either, like or not even like children's classics or anything like that. Like, I didn't grow up in a house where we'd like go to the opera or something like that, like or where anyone was interested in Shakespeare. But so like grade 9, we start um doing one play a year. So I guess we did 9, 10, 11, 12. We did one play a year. And I remember in grade 9 we read Twelfth Night, which is kind of funny that we started off with that play, but I do remember it. But it's like my attitude toward I was thinking back for this question, my attitude was much more um like, I don't understand this, but I wasn't worried about that, but I thought it was like I treated Shakespeare like scripture right from the start. Like, I just had this feeling that, like, if you could understand this, you would understand a lot. Like that and this is coming from, like, a kid in grade 9, like and I think I was thinking back, why did you have that feeling? But I think it was just from watching TV and stuff. You had seen people reference Shakespeare so many times from pop culture and things like that. And also too, like, I think back to then, like, this is back obviously before internet or before like, I didn't go to the library, like, my intellectual world was tiny, right? I had no I had, like, the books that I got from, like, Scholastic Book Fair. That was, like, the extent of it, right?
Yeah.
And so then when I started that and also too, I was very interested in, like, um, anything medieval, anything to do with that was always like castles, knights, anything like that. I would get books like that from the school library. And then so it kind of fit into that. I in my head there was no difference between Renaissance and medieval at the time. It was, that was how it came. And then I was thinking,
I'm here now.
yeah. And then I was also thinking like the only other book I had really was and so around that same time I grew up Catholic, so when you get, I guess your confirmation or whatever, they give you a Bible. So I was trying to read the Bible around that time, which I mean, we had a translation that was very simplified, like, it's called the Good News Bible, but I was trying to
Oh,
read.
I know that one.
Yeah, okay. And so I was trying to read that on my own, but I thought in my head, I thought that that was like, if I could understand the Bible, I would have. For some reason, I knew that Jesus Christ and uh, Julius Caesar around the same time. So I thought I'd get all the history of the world from the beginning to the to the Roman Empire if I read the Bible. So but I realized I took the same approach with Shakespeare, right? Like I was like,
Mhm,
I don't understand, and I don't even think grade 9. I don't think I can't imagine we took the book home and
mhm.
like I think the teacher was reading it to us and explaining it to us. And then also I remember we got to act out one of the scenes. And then I remember what my scene was. I played Viola in that first scene where she's shipwrecked, and I brought in like for like like a shawl to wear, and I thought it was like so funny for like the boys had to play girls parts, all that sort of thing.
Yes.
So we started with that. So, but yeah, I was just saying right from the beginning, and also too, you were saying you didn't really get into it until you got into the theater tradition, right? Like, but I was the exact opposite. Like there's not a I'm from Winnipeg. There's not a ton. We do have a Shakespeare once a year, but it's one play, and I never went to it at the time. But uh, like that. I was just thinking about that idea of treating Shakespeare like scripture, like something you'd interpret and that you'd dive in for to find the meaning. There's always that tension between um people who focus on it as pure literature, and then people who focus on um, a something to be experienced, something to be seen or acted, from a screen.
Yes.
And so anyway, I'll come back to that in a second. So like I was thinking, so we did Twelfth Night, and then we did the next years we did Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and Hamlet. And like I was sold from the beginning. But then as we went, like by the time
Wait, can I interrupt you for
yeah,
1 second?
yeah,
Does that mean that when you started doing those,
yeah,
you were actually I guess you were like, you're probably 12, 13, 14 years old.
yeah.
Um, were you having like, visceral experience, like aesthetic experiences of
Yeah.
those plays? Oh, nice.
Yeah. I would say by Hamlet so Hamlet was grade 12. By Hamlet for sure.
Mhm.
Like it was yeah. Yeah, Twelfth Night not so much, but I thought that was 12th Night, that was the first one, right? And I really liked the language in that you'd not kind of get it, but then sometimes you get a glimmer. And it felt to me like, you were learning about the history of the language sort of thing, which I'm making myself sound like an intellectual. I wasn't. It just happened to fit with my interest. Like uh
Mhm.
maybe by the time I got to grade 12, I was more of a reader. Like I was interested in no, even grade 11. But that definitely Hamlet. But then I was also thinking, so grade 11 was Macbeth, and I think that's when I really that was when I could read it on my own and not. I mean, you're constantly going back and forth from the notes, right? But uh, I really liked that play, and of course, Macbeth is such like it's like a perfect plot for getting a teenage boy interested, I would say. And then we also watched the movies started to come a bit. So, and I don't like many Shakespeare movies, but we did watch, in school, we watched Roman Polanski's Macbeth, and I think that's actually one of my favorite, versions of Macbeth. Like, he's such a
Okay. I gotta watch it the next week.
yeah. I mean, the more I learn about Roman Polanski, the less I like him as a person, but his
I
movies
understand.
yeah, his movies are like, that was to me, like, filmically, very great. And then when I did
Yeah.
so in grade 12, that's when we got to take more literature courses, so I took literature courses the whole year. And Hamlet was, I think, one of the ones we had to write a major paper on. So that's why I started to go to the library and get, like, academic like Harold Bloom used to have these little collections of academic essays for the plays. So I started getting those
Yeah.
and learning how to like cite a reference and read other people's interpretations of things. So but then that Kenneth
Amazing.
Branagh's Hamlet came out. Or no, actually it was before that. It was already out, but I rented it from Blockbuster. I remember. And that
Yeah.
one I would stay up and it was I think it was 4 hours long. It was in two VHS cassettes, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I'd watch it over 2 nights, like, watch one, and I know a lot of people hate that Brano one, and like a lot of authorship people hate it too. But I'd have to rewatch it to see. But like as a movie, it was a beautiful movie. I think they said
Yeah.
I think it was one of the last movies that was shot like in I think it got 70 millimeter. Like it's got
Okay.
it kind of gives you that feeling of like I think like Lawrence of Arabia and stuff like that were shot on, and they put in like a castle that was like they kind of set it a little after the Renaissance period, but just costumes and everything, it just worked out beautifully for me. And I didn't mind the long ride.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, it was yeah, I thought it was.
I loved it.
And then the only other thing so yeah, I was kind of into it. Then when I got into university, I took like English courses, and then the third year I took a Shakespeare. I took like one of those third year Shakespeare courses where it's just about Shakespeare, and I took it in the spring. So it's one of those courses. I don't know if you ever took these where you don't go like 3 times a week, you go every day for 2 or 3 hours, whatever it is. And so we did. So for those courses, I think it was 2 months long. It would have been like April, June. And then we did 3 plays a week. So that
Oh,
like
wow.
so but see to me that's when I kind of turned to difference because before every like it was always a year between I read a Shakespeare play where and was that getting back to like oh I cannot understand the syntax I just but then that when you had to read 3 week you almost like the notes started to melt away like you were just kind of
Okay.
being able to read it especially 3 weeks so like then we'd have class in the morning and I love spring classes because all winter long you've been going and it's so busy you can't find a spot to study it's crowded summer it's spring it's all calm spaces where you can go outside to read everything like that so I stayed on campus and just read for another 2 or 3 hours so I was done right there and
Mhm.
and so that's when I felt like I really so we did yeah 3 plays a week for 2 months so I got like through a substantial amount of the and actually okay well,
Okay.
going back to that so the teacher who taught that he was a joint professor between um, the theater department and the acting, so theater department and then English department. So he was more, really, he was talking more as an actor than a literature professor, which was interesting to see
Uh-huh.
because he had us watching when the entrances and exits were and making notice of any costume or prop they might have or stuff like that. And
Yeah.
but he took that attitude of like, so I remember he said, I didn't get you guys to buy a the complete works of William Shakespeare. I got you to buy, you know, this because he said that's what these are. They're like scripts of a movie. They're to be experienced, that kind of thing. And you know what I'm saying? Like he's like, I don't want you to treat it like you're getting like the dialogues of Plato. I want you to treat it like this was like
Yes.
entertainment on the stage, and these were like the scripts. But see,
Yes.
I'll go into that a different day. But I think I'm not sure that was the total Elizabethan attitude toward theater. I don't want to get into it now, but I just want to
Yes.
say, like, it was interesting how, like, a lot of people say, like, these aren't to be read, they're to be experienced. But then people like me, and I think there's something in that too, but I'm much more of like
I'm with you.
a reader. To me, I'm more of a reader, but because
Yes.
I don't have as much experience with the theater, So,
Yeah.
uh,
My understanding, and of course, we can talk about this later,
yeah,
but my understanding is that in the last 20 years, 30 years, that assumption
yeah.
that the plays were just to be experienced on the stage is being questioned by lots of scholars.
Oh,
That there was a literary tradition and there was an intention in the authorship
yeah.
for these to be read more, and anyway, we can go into that later, but I'm much more inclined towards that.
So just quickly, I'll go through like the authorship question because that at that time,
Yep.
no authorship doubts. Um, I should say too, right after I finished that course, I heard about a guy, an actor, who had memorized the entire Paradise Lost. I think the entire either it was one of the three of the poems or all three, and he'd do recitations of it where like over a 3-day period he'd recite the entire thing, which is making me think he might have done one book, but I think it was the whole thing. Anyway, I was getting interested in the art of memory, and I had just gotten Francis Yates' book, The Art of Memory, and
Mhm.
I was like, I want to try to memorize Shakespeare, which I never really did that well. But like, there's not the same. I didn't want to do Venus and Adonis, and I didn't, and I, that would be a feat, right? I didn't want to memorize a play because you're memorizing like not just the soliloquies, but all the little lines in between. So I came across. So I was
Yep.
looking for a book, So like, and I didn't want to memorize the sonnets because I wasn't like you as interested in the sonnets. So I came across this little book from Ted Hughes, the British poet, and it was his Essential Shakespeare, where he had
Oh,
said
love
like,
it.
you can take here's we'll talk about that opening essay before, but he was like these speeches and songs, what he had taken from the plays, these are great to memorize on their own. He says sometimes they're a better poem even taken out of the context. Like they're amazing to watch.
Mhm.
So I got that, but really he had this 60-page essay at the opening of the thing that completely changed like my way of looking at Shakespeare, because he links it to the art of memory. He's talking about people like Giordano Bruno. He's talking about Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, and I was just getting interested in those things, but I had no idea that Shakespeare might have also been, incorporating elements of like this kind of esoteric philosophy as well. So that kind of set me on that track as well. And I think
Yeah.
that's so before that, I'll say the only time I ever had a doubt spontaneously about the author was I
Yeah.
think when I was young, I found a book of my mom's from her college. No, I don't think it was a college days. It was like she used to be in those book clubs where you'd get like, 10 books sent out to you or whatever.
Yeah.
She had like a works of William Shakespeare from like the 70s or something like that. And I never read it, but I read the opening, like the biography of William Shakespeare at the beginning. No doubts, but that poem on the gravestone, that for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig, that poem. I thought like, are you really? That's what he, and I didn't picture like it really is like laid out in the church. I pictured like a cartoon gravestone out in a churchyard. But I'm like, that's
Yep.
that's what he wrote. But it didn't leave me to doubt anymore. I just thought so strange that he didn't do something more than that for his own grave marker.
Okay, that's really great to know
Yeah.
because, that is one of the first that's fascinating
Yeah.
because hearing about that poem on
Yeah.
his grave and you're right,
Yeah.
when we're younger, we don't know that it's inside a church architectural structure.
Yeah.
You just imagine a little gravestone with that poem, but
Yeah.
I think that's the
It
looking
sounds
back
like
to
a
that later,
pirate.
that's
It sounded like a pirate wrote it to me, honestly. That's how it when I first read it. And I'd known enough
yeah,
Shakespeare to know that, like, his soliloquies are much more dense and complex than that.
yeah,
Then the only thing there, so I had no doubts. I'd heard a few times, like, people talk about the Baconian theory that Francis, but I don't even think I thought to evaluate it. I just kinda thought, like,
yeah.
I didn't even reject or accept it. I just said, "Oh," like you'd hear about UFOs or like Elvis is still alive or something like that. I didn't think to do it. I really like this writer. His name is John Michael Greer. He has a blog. He writes about a ton of things, but he's done a lot of he's a Latinist, and he does some great translations for Renaissance Latin. Like he's currently working on John Dee's work. He had done Giordano's works before. And someone had asked him, did he think if Shakespeare wrote the works of Shakespeare? And he has a long reply section on his blogs, and he answered he didn't think that. And that's the first time I took it seriously, just from no argument. Just if you believe that, maybe I should think about it. That's the only, maybe like you're a theater director guy. Yeah.
Hold on, just
Yeah.
to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, it was Greer
Yeah.
was the first person that made you pause and go, "Whoa."
I just thought, oh, maybe there's something to it because his knowledge of the Renaissance is just
Yeah,
masterful. And so I
yeah,
thought, and so his main argument that he did in that little comment, which I'm not sure I would agree with it now, but he just noted like the vast vocabulary that Shakespeare had, and that led him to say
yeah,
there was probably a group of people writing this because, like, I
uh-huh,
think Shakespeare doubles Milton. Like he's, that sort of thing.
yeah,
And he had the idea that he hadn't really looked into it that much. I think he had read one book on it, which he recommended there. And he said, I have a feeling there was probably a group of noblemen, and that William Shakespeare, the person and the actor, was maybe involved with bringing these to the stage, maybe helping touch up lines. So I went with that. And so I didn't really look into it more at that point because I was wanting to learn more about Shakespeare and the age and the time, so I kinda had that in the back of my head so that was, like, 2018, and I had that so I started reading more, like, I read, like, Stephen Greenblatt's biography of Shakespeare, and I started to listen
yep,
to Shakespeare podcasts, like, there's a lot of good ones, but that was just kinda the back of my head, maybe Shakespeare wasn't the only one, but then I saw on Twitter a lot of people talking about the Oxfordian theory, which I'd never, I didn't know anything about de Vere or anything like that. And I thought, "Oh, I just maybe I'll get into that. I'll see what they're about." So I downloaded the audiobook of Margot Anderson's Shakespeare by Another Name, and that was during COVID, or it was walking, like, 2 hours a day. Like, what I would do is I'd drive to some part of the city I didn't know, and I just listen to audiobooks and drive because you couldn't go anywhere, right? And that book,
Yeah.
like, hit me like, I just loved that audiobook, like, it's a great book,
Great
but
also.
also the narrator is just perfect for that book.
I haven't heard the na I mean, I
Oh,
have it,
yeah.
but I just wanna say when when Paul Nicholson
Yeah.
gave me the 3 books,
Books as well.
one of them was that one, and I'll never forget what it was like just reading
Yeah.
that book. It was so enthralling.
I just feel it was laid perfectly because it introduced you to De Vere while it was working in the arguments. So you were getting a biography while at the same time as you were getting, like, a polemic about why would we think he's Shakespeare. So that as an introductory book to me, that worked fantastic. So, that's kinda so I listened to that, and then I just dove in with listening to everything I could get find and, any book that I could find.
Yes,
So, yeah.
yes. So that's when you were hooked in this new way. It's like, "Wait, who might have written these?"
I was, like, I don't think I ever came down on, like, it has to be De Vere, but De Vere was the main one in my
Yeah.
imagination. And there's the most of all the authorship group, there's the most, especially online, the most you can get of Oxfordian
Yeah,
materia. So that's what I
yeah,
dove into first. So,
fan
and I never really came to certainty, but, like, that was the one I was most interested in.
yeah, Um, okay, so you're actually segueing us right into the second question,
Yeah.
which is like, what is our current where do we currently stand in our understanding of the authorship question?
Mhm.
And you're perfectly
Yeah.
merging into that question. Um,
Yeah, how about you?
so in a way, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
I'll give that
I
one
can
the
I
rest.
can talk. Okay, you give your voice a rest, but, like, I'm fascinated by what you're saying, and,
Yeah.
we do have different I like the differences in how we came to this,
Mhm.
because we're so different in the fact that, like, I know we're different in age. Look, I'm willing to say I was born in '75. I think you're probably 70 years younger than me.
No. 5 years younger than you.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But point being, like, when I was, like, not able to even read a sentence of Shakespeare, you were starting to have this experience, like, there's something really important here. I really like that.
Yeah.
So for me, okay, where I am now with the Shakespeare thing, with the question of authorship is, um, I haven't had time to read all the other candidates and things like that. So, like, I need to say up front, if anyone's listening to this who's a Baconian, Novellian, Northian, whatever, like, I will admit right now, I haven't studied your literature,
Yeah.
and it deserves study.
Uh,
So, from my point of view, I'm fascinated, number 1, by the question of, is it possible that the guy in Stratford whose name was Shakespeare didn't write the plays? That's my first big question.
Yeah.
Like, is that possible
Yeah.
that there was a pseudonym or an allonym used by somebody else? That I'm fascinated by that question. And number 2, I am interested in the question of could de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, have been the person that actually did? And so without a lot of study in the other people, I'm very curious about de Vere. Um, and I I will admit up front, I want it to be him.
Yeah.
Like, and that has to do with a lot of psychological reasons I don't even know in myself, but I can tell you I have a desire for that to be him. So I know there's a lot of confirmation bias in me when I'm doing these studies. I can tell I'm wanting to read evidence in his favor, and that makes me uh very interested in the process of, like, how we form assumptions. Like, I'm as you said earlier, I'm most interested in how we come to form assumptions about these things, almost more than, like, who wrote the plays.
Yeah.
Um, so right now, I would say, my primary focus is the sonnets. Um, I I guess I should tell everybody that, like, so I was working at the Shakespeare Festival, and I think around 2014 or 2015, somebody, somebody I really respected who was very intelligent, an older woman from Romania, we were talking about books, and she was very happy that I loved reading literature. And then she asked me if I had read all of, Vladimir Nabokov's novels,
Yeah.
and I hadn't read any. I knew about Lolita
Yeah.
because everybody knows about Lolita,
Yeah.
but I hadn't. And she looked at me with utter shock. She couldn't believe, and I could tell she was so disappointed in me, and I remember thinking, like, I've heard about this guy Nabokov. In fact, one of my favorite American writers is a Southern man who died in 2009 named Donald Harrington, and he considered Nabokov his, like, mentor, his spiritual mentor. So, I decided it was time for me to read Nabokov. So that year, I started reading all of his novels, and I was blown away. That's when I started experiencing probably people who love jazz and have transcendent experiences listening to Coltrane or Miles Davis, where you just feel like this shouldn't be possible, like, this artistic creation should not be possible. I started having that experience with language
Yeah.
and through Nabokov, and that helped me start realizing that Shakespeare, even though I couldn't understand all of his plays and poems, I would notice that he often has moments all the way through his plays and all the way through his poems where he's doing what Nabokov is doing, where, like, language is doing something I can't understand, but it's gorgeous. Um, and then one day I came across a quote, I can find it later,
Yeah.
where Nabokov said, he was very opinionated, but he said, and Nabokov was a Russian and wrote all of his first 7 novels in Russian. And then because of the Bolsheviks and he had to flee Russia, live in Germany, live in Paris, and then move to America, where he wrote Lolita. In Ashland, Oregon. He finished Lolita in Ashland,
Really?
Oregon, I wanna say.
Yeah.
Yeah. He finished that there's a house in Ashland that I walked by where he finished writing Lolita, so that's a sacred place for me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, he he said there's a quote where he says, "There's nobody who has ever been so sensitive to the texture of language than William Shakespeare." And that idea of being sensitive to the texture of language, I was like, "Yeah, I think I know what you mean, but I don't know at all what you mean," and I that became very compelling for me. And he said something in another quote, he said something about the sonnets are where you can see this, exemplified. So, for some strange reason that I'll never understand, I decided to memorize all of the sonnets, and I don't have a good memory at all.
Yeah.
So, that was my task, and so for about a year and 2 months, um, I started memorizing sonnets, and I had a system,
Yeah.
a daily system of memorization. It was very satisfying, as you can imagine, you know, and on January 16th, 2016, I had all of the sonnets memorized. So that became
Sorry, how
the
long did it take you?
sonnets. I think it took me about a year and a few months.
Okay. That's quite a commitment.
Yeah. I would yeah, I had a system of, like, when I would go to the gym or, like, every day, there would be a way that I could take in another sonnet,
Mhm.
and then I had to repeat the sonnets I already learned. So, it was always driving to work and driving home from work that I'd work on the sonnets I learned, and I'd start to learn a new sonnet. Um, but what was interesting about that is while I was learning the sonnets, I was reading a lot of literature about language, aesthetics, um, art, and I was really loving the interplay between learning each sonnet, and then learning more about Shakespeare or more about language or more about art. So it was very um, a robust experience of
Mm.
like it fed me in many different ways. So um, the sonnets became sort of my fundamental way of starting to think about what was the mind that created these? Like, what was the mind doing that created these? And then I took that question into all these details that you and I love studying about the authorship question. Um, and I would say this to end my question number 2 on where do we stand. I would say that, like, I and I'll talk about this more in my personal videos that I put up on this, channel, but I probably have 3 or 4 different versions of Edward de Vere in my mind, and they're contradictory and they're very different. Um, and well, I have one version that did not write any of the plays.
Yeah.
I have I have a clear sense of an Edward de Vere that fits the records, that just didn't write them, but was an interesting guy.
Yeah.
But I have 3 or 4 different versions of him that wrote the plays, but they're very different, and that's something I'm gonna explore on this channel is how I hold those differences and why. And I wanna hear, hopefully, if anybody, maybe 3 or 4 different people start enjoying my conversations,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what people think about that.
Yeah.
Um, but right now, I don't know where I stand other than the fact that I think, it's definitely a great question, and I think Edward de Vere was a mysterious, fascinating, very interesting, person that, I can see, especially when we look at the sonnets and the story that's being told in them,
Yeah.
that, somebody was playing around with the notion of identity and names and hiding in a way that I find very interesting.
And a follow-up question for that, though, I was wondering, like, as you're taking this year to memorize the sonnets, and I'm guessing you're having to repeat them, like, in cycles and circles as you go, are you is it I mean, I guess a lot of your task is focused on, "Oh, what was that line? What what was that word?" Because I know when I've tried to memorize poems, the word starts slipping and you can think of 2 whatever, that sort of thing. But are you starting to
Yep.
notice, like, like, meanings? Like, I think he's talking about this, or does this relate to 12 sonnets ago, or does that sort of
Yeah.
pattern thing start showing up in your head just naturally, or
Yes. Yes, and that was very enjoyable, and it almost makes you crazy, but the more you start to know the sonnets as a
Yeah,
whole, and the more that they're all sort of humming in my mind, and I can, like, pick up any sonnet at any time, then I really start experiencing them as a whole, and you're exactly, like the word, I'll talk about this in my
yeah,
personal videos,
yeah,
but the word record, he uses the
okay,
word record.
yeah,
And then I started noticing that record shows up maybe 6 4 or 5, 6 times in the sonnets, and I started noticing, "Oh my gosh, it's really interesting
like,
how"
with variations on the
Yes.
yeah,
And then this is some of the stuff, I don't know when I'll talk about, but, like, then I started learning more about sonnet structures, like,
yeah,
from Petrarch on, like, um, that these were not, the typical story on the sonnets, what you typically hear when you hear about sonnet sequences, even Petrarch's classic sequence, you typically are told that they're sequences of like 50 to 100 sonnets
yeah,
where it's a man mostly in love with a woman he can't have, and he's angry and upset and hurt that he can't be with her.
yeah,
And even scholars for a long time thought of these things like that. And then it started changing, and more scholars started being like, that's not what's happening at all.
yeah,
Like these these writers they're mocking a persona of themselves. So they create a persona. Petrarch created a persona of himself. Sidney created a persona of himself, and they mock
yeah,
their selfishness and their narcissism,
yeah,
and they mock it in contrast to some vision of a theological perfection or a social perfection. So they're always playing with like a narcissistic image of themselves in contrast to a notion they have of the truth.
yeah,
And that changes the sonnet cycles totally because no longer you're not reading them as these love poems. Because I'll tell you what, when you read Shakespeare sonnets,
yeah.
they're not romantic.
No.
You know, you can find individual sonnets and make them romantic in your mind,
Yeah,
but they're not romantic. They're caustic, they're ironic, they're desperate, and they're very funny. Some of the ones that are considered the most romantic are actually the most funny. So anyway, this is just my introduction to saying
but
I
having one more
started
follow-up.
realizing.
Okay,
Please.
yeah. I just want to know, so as you're getting into those sonnets, um, for I guess two-part, did you come to it with some idea of a love triangle, or, you know, that sort of thing. And as you went through them, was a story developing in your head? Like, could you have written
Mhm.
like, I think here's a story that starts here and then this happens and then did something like that start to emerge as you cycled through them in your head, you know?
That's such a good
Yeah.
question. I have to say, around the time that I started doing the sonnets, probably within the first 2 months
Yeah.
of starting to memorize them, I was introduced to Hank Whittemer's theory of the Prince Tutor
Yeah.
theory. We won't talk about that now tonight, but there's a specific theory. There's a very specific interpretation of the sonnets that is I don't agree with it yet,
Yeah.
and whatever, but, like, I love it. It's so fascinating, and Hank Whittemer, for anybody listening to this who doesn't know about him, like, he's such an incredible human being. He's so kind, he's so smart, and even if you don't end up agreeing with all of his theories, his books and what he's brought up about the sonnets, you'll just learn so much. So, when I started learning the sonnets, I was also taking in his theory. Now, I wasn't necessarily believing it, but that was the way I started thinking of the
Mhm.
sonnets. I thought of, like, there's an older aristocrat writing to a younger person in an ironic way that has a sexual overtone, but it's actually much more of a father figure. And then I I kinda thought of the Dark Lady as the Queen of England. I no longer do, but
Yeah.
that was my early way of holding it.
Yeah.
And I don't hold that anymore,
Yeah.
but it was how I started.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Sorry for myself for this question of like where I'm at with the authorship question, who my influences have been. Uh See, it's funny too, we have a difference too, because I'm not I wasn't not a sonnets guy, but I definitely read I was much more of a play guy. Like the sonnets were always difficult for me to get into. And I think I told you this once. It sounds like to me like the play I can get into because like the poems are nested in this huge story structure with these characters. And the sonnets at first, I'm more into them now. I've read them twice now. Nothing as much as you've got into, but it much felt like a short like piano minuet being played now, and we start again, we do it again. Like, when I'm reading through them, like, at most I could read through is, like, maybe like, you had got me in this idea of that maybe nines are important in sonnets, so that's what I did.
Sure.
I read them in nines, right? So and that's about the much as I could take, and then I'd like
Wait,
time. Yeah,
can I just ask?
yeah,
Because for me, the nines is just like it's not every 9, it's like 9 to 18 to 27 to 36,
yeah. I
it's
didn't
like
think it that
those
way.
9s.
I thought
Okay, okay.
sometimes it worked out. I did notice at the 9 there was some sort of a shift. Uh,
Yeah.
and a few times I thought maybe, "Oh, I don't know if Jeff is right on this one or whatever." I don't really have you know, it's I remember I listened to, an interview with Martin Hyatt, and I think he only has one video up. I think he also has, like, a really in-depth, uh, view of the sonnets, but he says in there,
Mhm.
he says, like, he's a sonnets guy, he's like, "I had to remind myself that the plays existed." Like, it's so funny how there's those 2
Yeah,
kind of,
yeah,
ways you could, take it. But anyway, so for myself,
yeah.
um, yeah, very much like you, like, I ha I wouldn't say I haven't like, I would say I'm Oxfordian. I usually say it this way. I'm Oxfordian, but I don't like saying that like it's like my religion or something like that or a creed that I
Yeah.
accept. It's because it's the case that I know the best, and it's the case that's impressed me the best. Like, I've had the most times where I've heard someone's presentation or an article, and I'm like, "Geez, that makes a ton of sense." That's really the amount
Mhm.
of it. And but like you like, I also keep the way my head works, I definitely am like, Am I totally right though? Could it be another way? Am I missing something? Is there another interpretation?" Also, I had done some researching on, other cases. I think big ones for me, like, I've actually really early on when I was getting into the authorship question, I was in a group of people on Twitter who were looking in it, and this Italian scholar, uh, um, I won't say her last name because I don't want to say it, but Mariana, I Iannacone, perhaps? She has a Florio channel, but she came in our group, and she's really I was already really interested in Giordano Bruno, and she kind of filled me in this Florio, this connection with John Florio. So I know
She's great.
something. Yeah, and she's been so great. Like I don't bug her with my Oxfordian stuff. I don't even bother saying it because it's like such a resource because she's, a native Italian speaker, but she's also trained in Latin. So she's like helped me translate poems and any question I have, like, did Bruno go here or did Bruno ever say anything about this? She knows, and Florio she knows better. So that one I have somewhat looked into it, although she kind of keeps her theory close to her chest. So I'm not. She definitely shows you ways that Florio was related to Shakespeare. If she has a full theory, she's probably developing it. So there is a book in the library I go to that's not by her, that is John Florio with Shakespeare, something like that. So eventually I'll get to it. And
Mhm.
I did read that the first book on the Thomas North theory with Michael Blanding writing about Dennis McCarthy's theory. So I listened no, I listened to that as an audiobook. So I have I
Yeah.
skimmed through it once, and I do have his book,
Yeah.
the newer book that he wrote himself. So eventually I'll get to that. And
Okay.
so I do look at some of these other theories, but I wouldn't say I've spent nearly as much time on them as I have with the ones that with the Oxfordian case. So, and
Right.
I am interested in looking at them because I do feel like how can you really be certain if you haven't exposed yourself to alternatives, So, and I'm
Yeah.
also not really aiming for certainty. Like, it's not something I think about all the time. Like, is De Vere the guy or is he not? Or is Shakespeare? That doesn't
Yeah.
cross. And usually to me, in my head, I think that level of thinking to me is kind of worthless. It doesn't mean much. It kind of, to me, it's like a gestalt impression of everything you've taken in. Where do you say? Yeah. But to me, it's like
Yeah.
I want to dial down on something particular. Like right now, I'm dialed down
Mhm.
on Gabriel Harvey's pamphlets, and I want to go through that.
Yeah.
That to me is more valuable. But then even there, let's say you think, oh yes, this definitely indicates that De Vere is Shakespeare, or it's someone else is Shakespeare. Then you still have that's only one little piece, and there's all these other pieces.
Yeah.
So I'm more
Yeah.
interested in the pieces than in someone's overall impression. And I always think too, like, there's been so many times in my life where I believed something, it was huge to me. It was and then something happens and it's not I don't think that way anymore. I lose It's like losing your religion, like
Yes.
it
Yes.
and then you seem so sure and now you're not. And then so I'm like
Yes.
just that feeling of being sure is like there's this line from Bob Dylan I like. He says, "Everything I've ever known to be right has been proven wrong. I'll be moving along." He has this line like and then the guy moves along. Like that's happened to me like 3 or 4 times. So, I'm
Yeah.
always waiting, maybe someday. And also I want to leave myself room. I kind of made 2 rules for myself when I was really like, okay, you're getting obsessed with this, just keep going. But like one, it's like at any moment you should be able to walk away from the whole question or from a candidate or whatever. If you really think that, don't feel stuck because that's where, like, not like a lost, what do they call it? A lost cause, a sunk cost
Yeah.
fallacy. Like,
Some cost benefit
yeah, yeah,
fallacy.
yeah. So, and also too, I also always want. This probably goes to more like what am I reading about? I always kind of set a rule for myself, like I love reading and I love reading about many different things, history, literature, stuff. Focus on this question that if you did it for 10 years straight, and then you remember at the end of the 10 years, maybe you'd say, I think I was mistaken. I think it was the guy from Stratford. Make it that it wasn't a waste of
Yeah.
time. So that you're reading
Yeah.
so I'm reading Giordano Bruno. Half of my head is like, did this influence Shakespeare? But half of it is just what is
Yes.
Bruno or whatever. Then I'm getting to Philip Sidney,
Yes.
Spencer, and I would have
Yes.
wanted to read them anyway. But I that's why I think this question, it has energized all like I'm reading Plato, which I always wanted to read and everything like that. But I'm
Yeah.
also thinking, what did Shakespeare get out of this? Did De Vere have something particular with this? And it just charges
Oh,
I read.
can I just say, this is where you and I overlap the
Yeah.
most. Like, that we feel like even if like, this is where and also we're very different. The reason I laughed
Yeah.
5 minutes ago is I am one of those people, I often do try to think of smoking guns
Yeah.
and, like, what would be the smallest amount of evidence that would come out, a document that would, like, change everything.
Yeah.
I love that. So I go there, but I think where you and I overlap is that at the end of the day, I don't care. Like, this is such an energetic study, you start studying Plato, you start studying linguistics, you start
Yeah,
studying psychology,
yeah,
and hopefully after 10 years, if you find out that it was Stratford guy, you're excited because you just learned the truth and you know for sure,
yeah,
like if a smoking gun came out from Stratford,
yeah,
we would be excited.
yeah,
And I think you and I we wouldn't feel like we wasted the last 10 years
yeah,
because we studied so many things that are fascinating in
yeah.
our attempt to get there.
I will say one thing about that. I would let's say there was a smoking gun, William Shakespeare of Stratford wrote them. It would take me some, like, rehab to, like, reorient myself to the works, like, it wouldn't there would be a sense of loss. I'm not saying that, but you know, I do think, like, the works are the most here's another rule I have for myself. The works to me are the most important thing. Like, I I'm not
Mhm.
devoted to the person of De Vere or wherever it is. I do like the idea I have of him, but to me, the reason I like him so much is because of the works. That's why you'll never
Yeah.
hear me saying anything bad about William Shakespeare, Thomas
Yep.
North, whatever, because I don't want to wind up being the guy who insulted the guy who actually wrote them. So when I hear these casts, like, people hate Marlowe, they hate whatever, but
Oh,
they're taking it as like he's the guy, he's their guy. But I'm like, just say I'm
oh.
wrong. I want to be on record that I never say anything bad about that guy. So
I know, and
yeah,
it's like and that's the reason why I think it's so important that we make multiple versions of each
yeah,
person, like,
yeah,
I feel like if you can't think of Marlowe
yeah,
in at least 3 different wildly, radically different ways,
yeah,
you're not reading the documents.
yeah,
If you can't think of, Edward de Vere,
mhm,
look, this is gonna upset some people, but just from the documents, if you can't think of him as a narcissistic asshole, I wish okay, fine,
yeah,
but I can also think of him as a beautiful, like, um, Alexander Waugh,
mhm,
he increasingly went in this direction that De Vere was always sort of in a pious, religious, kinda modality, even in his waywardness,
yeah,
and I don't know if that's true, but I can see it. I can see how the documents also can
yeah,
tell that story, and I do wanna say, just we'll go back to you, but
yeah,
looping back to my thing is that early on for me, when I got into this question,
yeah,
I emailed Alexander Waugh, who, by the way, if you don't anyone listening to this, go watch his videos. He's just a wonderful rhetorician, human being, interesting mind, and, I am so happy that I probably have, 12 years of emails with him back and forth on this question,
yeah,
and it was a delight to be engaged with him,
yeah,
and, he, he's one of the few people as I've sort of seen more patterns that I think are happening in the sonnets, um, more of the and I'm not a mathematical guy at all. Anybody who knows me will say, "This is silly that I'm about to say this," but, like, one of the things when you learn about sonnet cycles over the last 600 years, they were doing a lot of mathematical stuff with the structure of the sonnets. So, you have the poems going, like, 1 through 100,
yeah,
but then you have relationships between the poems that have ratios, and, that's pretty well understood now that that was happening, and that's kind of what I'm trying to look at with Shakespeare sonnets is, like, what mathematical patterns was he creating in terms of the sonnets. Alexander Waugh was very interested in that, and I shared some of my stuff with him, and I will say, this is the ultimate irony. As you know, Daniel, and as many people listening to this, because I think the first people listening to anything we put out there will be Oxfordians.
yeah.
Um, Alexander was a big proponent of the number 17,
Okay, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, like he saw Edward de Vere was
1740?
planting what? 1740,
1748.
right. 17s and 40s and 1740, like those were his things. So, one day, I don't remember what I was listening to the radio, NPR, and I heard about this notion in math called the, Ruth Aaron pair. Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron are baseball players, and I think one of them hit 153. Anyway, the notion is this mathematical notion that when with 2 numbers that are right next to each other, like 153 and 154, they share a common number which their factors add up to.
Oh, okay.
So, I heard that, and then randomly, the person on the program said, "An example of 2 numbers that are this are 153 and 154." 154. And the sonnets end, well, they really end at 152,
Yeah.
but then there's these two strange poems at the end that are about Cupid,
Yeah.
and they're almost the exact same sonnet,
Yeah.
but he numbers them 153 and 154. And on this radio program, they said that that number, they share the number 20.
Yeah.
And then I went back and I looked at the sonnets, and if you look at sonnet 20, it's this very it's a well-known sonnet in Shakespeare circles because that's where he mentions the master mistress,
Yeah.
and it's very, very, very tricky, and
Yeah, that one does throw you
I
for a loop.
started re
Yeah. The first time I read that, that's like,
it throws
I
you
don't think something goes off the rocks there or something, you know?
so
Yeah.
something goes off the rocks. You have the first 19 sonnets where he's just saying, "Have a baby, have a baby, have a baby, have a baby," and he's like in sonnet 18, he says, "Okay, don't have a baby, I'm gonna make you immortal,"
Yeah.
and then in sonnet 20, he gets really interesting with this notion of a master mistress, and he never comes back to that.
Yeah.
So, I wrote an email to Alexander Waugh, and I said, "Holy crap, like, there's this interesting relationship between the Cupid sonnets at the end, 153 and 154, and sonnet 20, because it's sort of the master mistress notion links together the fair youth and the dark lady in a way that no other sonnet does in the cycle."
Yeah.
And then Alexander was, like, very happy to hear from me,
Yeah.
and the next thing I knew, he put out a video a few months later where he finally discovered the 1740 in the sonnets
Okay. Yeah.
because he said that he used this notion of sonnet 20 being doubled
Yeah.
because 153 and 154 double it. That gave him his 40.
Yeah.
So he said that, like, that was his finding of 1740
Yeah.
in the sonnets. Now, I don't think I agree with him necessarily on the
Yeah.
1740, but because I love him so much.
Yeah.
I love that even though I don't necessarily agree with him, I like that my finding of this pattern made its way into Alexander's research.
No, that's
Uh,
you'll have to make a video explaining that in more depth. You had told me about that,
I
but
like
I'm getting it more now that you're explaining it in person. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway, I just want to go back to the one thing I was gonna say, like, we were talking about certainty and not certainty, who's your candidate, how much you to believe. I think sometimes, like, I've offended some Oxfordians when I've been in conversation where I have this, like, um, I leave room open, like a 3% chance that maybe it was just William Shakespeare who's just getting knowledge from connections he had or whatever. And I think sometimes people
yes,
are offended by that because some of these people have been in this for like 30 years and they've devoted so much
yeah,
time to their own research, getting other people's. But I think I also, when I say that, I'm talking about for me because I have not seen everything. I've only taken in a
mhm,
small fraction of what's out. And I think some people hear that as like, I'm saying on the broad, like on the broad spectrum of all the evidence has come on, we cannot say it's the Vere or something like that. I'm just saying what I've seen. I haven't seen everything. I haven't put in nearly the years that some of these people have. So that's just a personal statement. I couldn't say that the evidence
mhm.
points to this or that. I haven't seen all the evidence or more importantly, thought about it all and, analyzed.
Yeah,
And the other thing I wanted to come back to, so I guess part of this question was like, maybe I'll do like maybe we'll start working in that last question too is like who has influenced you and where are you going with
yeah,
this thing? So like you bring up Alexander Waugh. So like right after I got through Margot Anderson's Shakespeare by Another Name, like some of the first videos you start getting into are Alexander Waugh. So those two are kind of like paired in my head. And like
yeah,
he like I'm coming out of that interest in Ted Hughes, the interest in Hermeticism, the in Neoplatonism, and then Alexander Waugh fits so well with that. Like it was like when I'm listening to that, and he's so generally erudite, and he expresses his opinions like like a like an educated British person does, that sort of thing. Like it just was great.
yes,
But, I am finding, like, I
yeah,
have gone through waves where sometimes I'm like, "I don't know about this theory or that," but, like, I'm currently in this deep dive on the pamphlet wars, and I've been listening to some of Waugh's stuff that relates to Thomas Nash and some of his and, like, there's way more in that now than I heard at before. Like, I'm like, "Oh, I wouldn't have
mhm,
thought that Alexander would have read that, or he would like it was already incorporated. So I do think this like one thing I'd like to do with this channel. There's a few like I'd like you at one point you had said something about doing maybe reaction videos, but I'd like to do something where like there's these parts of like Waz videos in particular. Another one I really like is David Shakespeare. There's these parts in it that I'd like to like maybe take a clip, maybe take 5 clips of it, and then we could play them and like take them apart because sometimes I think there's more in those that haven't been like fully digested. I don't hear a lot of people talking about some of these ideas. So if we could help like give our opinion on it, but also like that's the thing with YouTube, and unfortunately, both of them have passed away. Like sometimes if it's been out for 5 years, it drops down. Like if we could re-up them, like look at this argument, like what he's saying there, and maybe point out problems, but bring it back to a discussion amongst a few of us anyway. That's one thing.
Yes.
And I think for my own videos, going along those lines, like two of the things I'd like to do. I know that you're big into the sonnets and might want to do shorter. Well, I'll let you talk about
Yeah.
what you'd like to do. But for me,
Yeah.
two of my big interests, like I'm really interested in the history of Western esotericism. So that's things like Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, alchemy, astrology, that sort of thing, especially as it is in the Renaissance. The interesting thing, though, there is right now, like currently, a renaissance of people who are not practitioners, who are studying the Western esoteric tradition as an aspect of religious studies. And I think this really started in like I think the 1980s in the University of Amsterdam. There was a scholar called Wouter Hanegraaff, and he's kind of inspired this whole generation of these like amazing scholars who are just studying all this neglected material of philosophy and religion and mysticism and even alchemy as part of science and all these things. And they're
Yeah.
all these subjects that were for a long time in the in academia, it was kind of like frowned upon to only a practitioner would look into that. And now they're treating it as
Yeah.
a legitimate aspect of religious studies. And there's so much new stuff coming out of there. And it's like when you're looking through Shakespeare, it's like low hanging fruit to spot some of the connections. Because very few people who are really well versed in that stuff have looked at the Shakespeare works in that. I'm not saying nobody has, it's increasing
I know.
in a lot, but it's like it's a lot easier to find something new there than to look at
Yeah.
Shakespeare's attitudes towards like the Wars of the Roses or whatever like that. There's oh,
Yeah.
or like just look
Exactly.
Giordano Bruno in Shakespeare. I look through that and it's like people have just tapped the surface of that, and they've done some great work. But like so that's what I'd like to do. Also, I'd like to do like some videos that are not particularly on the authorship question, but like so like I'm the kind of person with my job that I have a lot of time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube videos per day, right? And part of the reason that I can stay intellectually active with working a full-time job is because people put out videos where like if I can't look into that yet, I can get started with listening to videos. So I'd like to do that for other people.
Yeah.
Like I've been going like for the last few years I've been researching so much Thomas Nash. So I'd like to do just like a plain biography of Thomas Nash. Like but so that like an hour long, 2 hours long, whatever it is. So that someone who doesn't have time, like there isn't an audiobook biography of Thomas Nash. So we do a conversation with that and just go through here's where he was born, here's where he went to university. That
I
sort of
would
thing.
love them.
Yeah, and then it doesn't even have to have we could do the authorship implications of Thomas Nash separately, just a straight up
Yes.
or like another one I've done a lot is John Dee. I'd love to do like a John Dee biography. I've been into folk gravel,
Oh my gosh.
like some of these figures, so that's kind of where I would like to go. But we'll go uh back to you here. I'll throw it back to you because I think those ones are going to take a very long time to do. Like at most, you're going to get 2 of them a year. So maybe you could say who could fill in the gap between those long, long waits? I wonder.
Oh my gosh, Daniel, first of all, I love your mind, and sometimes I feel like the reason we're doing this channel is just to get 2 or 3 videos from you a year where you share with us your deep dives into Nash and D, and I think you're right, like, I really agree with your intuition that maybe the first video is just the biography and all the interesting things, and then the next video is how it might connect to De Vere and authorship.
Yeah.
I think that's there's some wisdom in that. But I love how you think, and it's refreshing for me because I can't do what you do intellectually. So it's very if I can help you do your work, like, by creating videos where twice a year,
Yeah.
3 times a year, maybe 4, you come to us with, like, what you're studying, I will be so happy.
Mhm.
And I think you're throwing the ball into my lap now to say what I would bring.
Yeah.
So, dear viewers, dear listeners, um, my videos okay, we already know I love the sonnets, and I'm very shy. I'm not shy about, um, what I shared about Nabokov saying that Shakespeare is paying attention to the texture of language in a way that nobody else has, or everybody's striving to have that kind of sensitivity to the texture of language. I'm not shy about that. So I think my videos will often be exploring that from a very simplistic way. Like, I might share portions of sonnets, share what I love about the language in it, and just let anybody listening, if there's 3 or 4 people listening, they can comment on, "Oh, yeah, I hear that too," or "What about this?" I'd love to hear other people are hearing in those patterns, and, that would be great. Um, just so you know, Stephen Booth, um, was um, a Shakespeare commentator and a close reader of language, and his works on Shakespeare are, to me, the holy grail when it comes to paying attention to, what Shakespeare was doing linguistically and poetically. But unfortunately for Oxfordians, at this point, it's not very satisfying because Booth had no interest at all in the question of who wrote these. He was only interested in the texture of what was happening in the mind that was creating these sentences. I happen to think, and if you're listening to this, Sky Gilbert, I'm a big fan of yours. Um, I happen to think that research into the rhetoric of that time might down the road be where we start finding some smoking guns because I think we're, as you said earlier, I think we're just scratching the surface of beginning to see what these poets were doing w- consciously with language and ambiguity and what they called perspective art, where you try to make an image work in 2 or 3 different ways at once. I think we're just starting to see that all of these writers were very aware of that and very interested. That's kind of their main thing. So I that's kind of like what I am going to be focusing on is like presenting short videos that aren't very systematic, that aren't very intellectual, where I just start presenting some of these ideas of what Shakespeare seems to be doing in the sonnets. Now, I am shy about some of the patterns that I'm finding in the sonnets, the mathematical stuff and the proportional stuff. I haven't shared, maybe only with Alexander Waugh. I shared a couple of them, but I'm feeling ready to, not because I think they're great discoveries, but because it's like, as you know, Daniel, I'm very skeptical about how easy it is to feel we found a pattern when it's just like a Rorschach test and we're just
Yeah.
seeing what we need to see. So this year, I might do a presentation at the next Shakespeare conference. Who knows if I get it selected? But that'll be where I first start sharing some of the 3 or 4 main patterns that I'm finding in the sonnets.
Yeah.
But in these videos, I just want to present short, fun, creative, spontaneous videos where people can play around with Shakespeare in a way that might be interesting.
Yeah.
And then I think that's a nice contrast to what you will bring when you come with your videos, and they're more like sharing what you're reading in the pamphlet wars. Because I have so many questions, and I really, really I even think the more I start to get a sense of what might be happening in the sonnets, the more I realize that the pamphlet wars and the scandal that keeps in the sonnets, there's this mention of a scandal or 2 or 3 different scandals.
Yeah.
I think they have something to do with some of what you're studying a lot about,
Yeah.
and I need to learn more about that, so it's gonna be through
Yeah.
you
I should
and
say
other people.
I will I do plan to do more videos in 2 or 3 year, but I'm hoping those will be, like, maybe
Yeah,
conversations with you, maybe an interview, maybe with
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
I do have some ideas, like, sometimes I find a little nugget of information that usually if I find a nugget, like some little thing that no one's seen at that as far as I know, no one's seen, I wanna build into something big, but sometimes I find those and it's not gonna go into anything big. Maybe then
Yeah.
I could do a shorter video of that. Um, and
Yes.
yeah, so and I'd like to do some interviews along the way, and we should say
Yes.
for it's maybe our next video should be us bringing Matt Hutchinson on because he's gonna be the 3rd contributor to this channel. But
Yep.
I'm just what you just last said, Matt knows he knows the sonnets very well. He knows Alexander Waugh's theory about that scandal very well. But
That's
he
crazy
knows
to hear it.
but he also knows the pamphlet war very well. He knows, like, he's into the Parnassus
Okay.
plays, and, like, that's kind of the tail end of this period. Like, yeah, so I think he's gonna be a nice bridge even between us because 'cause I'm not nearly as into the sonnets as and sonnet sequences as you,
Yeah.
but I know Matt is to some extent, and so I
Yeah.
think, like, as a 3rd member, it's gonna be and I'm
That's
thinking that,
great.
look, he's a much faster person at putting out new research. Like, I think
Okay.
for me, it's like a presentation 1 every 2 years. He's like 1 a year, plus an article, plus he probably has other ideas. So, I think with the 3 of us
Yes.
going, we can kinda keep a channel humming with various kinds of content. So, I'm
Yes.
glad we finally, got this together and got everyone on board at the same time, so, yeah.
Yes, and I wanna say you just reminded me, like, one of the things I would like to do, it would be an honor, and I can't quite imagine being able to do it, but, like, for me, the idea of being able to interview Ross
Oh, yeah.
or being able to interview Roger, just, like, create a context where, like, they can talk, and also I can bring my questions and what I find interesting. That would be so much fun,
Yeah,
and, for anybody
yeah,
who's listening to you and I now after all this time, like, I wanna say maybe this is hyperbolic, but I have no interest. Like, when we do these conversations where we just start talking,
yeah,
I have no interest in them being tight, systematic. Um, I really want them to be like 2 people on a porch at night,
yeah,
before they go to bed, just talking into the evening about something they find interesting. So, like, and I think there are people out there that don't mind that. There will be some people that, like, find this frustrating because we just throw out all these different things, but I know there's a kind of person that just enjoys the camaraderie between you and I as we explore our ideas and our interests, and that to me is what these conversations are about. And then there can be other conversations that are tighter and more focused, but
yeah,
this is what I wanna be able to do a lot of where we just, like,
yeah,
start talking.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I'll say goodbye just saying that right now,
Yeah,
I'll be having a membership tier where you can pay $1,000 a month, and you can join you can join my tier.
yeah,
You have to purchase this book by Stephen Booth. It's the commentary on the sonnets, and, that's the first step in becoming a member of my club, and, of course, I'm kidding, but, you are gonna be anybody who listens to my videos is gonna be hearing way too much of Stephen Booth, so it's been really fun talking to you, Daniel, and I can't wait to talk to Matt.
yeah. Alright, till next time.